We'll go ahead and get started. Title of this webinar, Maximizing Digital Social Value in Agency New Business. One more thing I guess I should say, if you have questions, feel free to send me the text. If for some reason I'm thinking it's going to be kind of a long answer, I will get back to you. The software we use, we can see every question that comes up after the fact. So if for some reason I don't get to your question, we'll definitely get back to you. Quickly, who am I? I already said, Lee McKnight, Director of Business Development at RSW US. Quickly, if you don't know who RSW US is, we're a full-service outsourced business development group. We help agencies essentially win new business. So we only work with agencies, and that's of all types and sizes. We represent them as a part of their team. Ultimately, we're there to get clients qualified meetings, do that in front of decision makers, and try to help them move closer to close. So why am I giving this webinar? My job is twofold here at RSW. So along with bringing agencies on board as clients with our owner Mark Snyder, I also handle the social media efforts for RSW. So certainly while I'm not going to profess, being, God forbid, a social media guru, because we all know that that's a dirty word, I will say social media has been something that certainly has helped us, RSW that is, garner new clients, and it's been successful. So from that standpoint, I can tell you some things that have worked for us. And also, it's always about needing to learn, to grow, to stay on top of things. And that's really how this webinar was born, interestingly. It originally started as a project this summer. Social media, as I said, it's always been good for us in the sense of getting clients on board and interaction. We've applied the same principles to it that we do to new business. We advise our clients to follow the same in terms of what we espouse. So ultimately, a few things. When I say what we espouse, it's consistency in terms of new business. It's valued content. It's a subtle sell with thought leadership at the forefront. So what we did, we brought a third party in, someone who could take a look at our current prospects, that is agencies, and look in the social media realm, what's been successful for them, what's working currently. So really set up an informal research project, if you will. Were we in the right places? Were we spending time in the right places? So per this slide, we wanted to increase RSW US awareness via social media by discovering where our prospects are currently in terms of engaging them currently in better ways and how we might, as I said, better engage or interact with them. So we took a representative sample of 100 agencies from the April Ad Age Agency Report. That's 2012, obviously this year. In terms of get a little deeper, of those 900 agencies, we chose numbers 400 to 500. Sample right about in the middle of the 900, as you might expect, or as you can tell. But also, and here's just this is a screenshot of the or I should say the print version of that report. And I know it's a little bit tough to see, but what we did was we started there with 400, which is peppercorn, and these are U.S. agencies, by the way, the top 900 in terms of U.S. revenue. So that 400 in terms of revenue, 14,362 down to 500. There's Sullivan at 10,076 in terms of that revenue. That's about the sweet spot for us in terms of clients as well. So it made sense in terms of that sample. And also we chose the month of May, quite frankly, because it was May. How's that for scientific? But ultimately we wanted to have a sample that was concise, but at the same time, had a nice base. So the webinar goal then, we mentioned that it originally started as a project for RSW. Well, as Mark and I were talking about, webinar topics for this summer, for the 2012 summer series, we thought, depending on what the findings are here, could be a really great way to introduce some stats and tie that into a webinar here, and so here we are today. So in terms of what you ideally are going to get out of this today, agencies are consistently asking us, whether they're clients, whether they're prospects, what are other agencies doing to engage in new business, whether it's social media, whatever it may be. On top of that, we know your most precious commodity is time. In terms of new business, clients come first. They have to, right? So that's a main reason why agencies come on board with us. And what we typically found in webinars like this or presentations, what have you, no matter how good they may be, what we were constantly, or not constantly, but what we typically were seeing is, we want to be able to do more than just tell you. We want to be able to show you. So we want to show you today how your fellow agencies in that sample are using social media today, and how we are, and then specifically, what are they doing well? We want you to be able to go, so we're going to name check them, and we want you, this is not an endorsement necessarily of any one agency, but it's something to where after this is over, and I should tell you this, we're going to have the webinar ultimately is going to be not only posted on our resources page, but is also, and you can see I have here a question, good one, we'll be able to email your presentation. Yeah, what I'm going to have is the presentation is going to be on by Tuesday at the latest in terms of the slides, because what I do want to do is put 1 or 2 pages of live links to every agency, but then also do a couple other things that you're going to see here. So absolutely, this is going to be available. So we're going to show you where those agencies are in terms of platforms. We're going to show you how they rank in that sample of 100. We're going to show how they're using each given platform. And it's all with the goal of improving your awareness amongst your prospects and your effectiveness via social media. So breaking it down, agency social media usage in 2012. RSWUS, how are we using social media? And then finally, a few thoughts. We attended the HubSpot Inbound Conference a few weeks ago in Boston. Mark was actually asked to speak there at 2 sessions. Really enjoyed it, got a lot out of it. And again, this is not necessarily an endorsement of HubSpot as a platform or as a service, while it is a great service. Having said that, mostly we're going to focus on one key speaker and a few nice takeaways he had that dovetail nicely into our web presentation today. So agency social media usage in 2012. What platforms are the agencies in our sample currently using? Going to look at that. Going to look at how often they're using. Going to look at recommendations on how to best use these platforms yourself. Give you on average what these folks are doing and doing well. So the platforms we researched, probably not a surprise, Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and Pinterest. Now, LinkedIn is not a part of this, although we would absolutely include it. Probably not a surprise to hear that. Going to explain in brief why it's not a major part of the webinar today. And we'll do that here in a few slides. Let's start with Google+. So platforms used. 37 out of 100 agencies in our sample use it. Actually a little bit higher than I thought, quite frankly. You know, Google Plus gets beat up, I think, these days, and really since its launch. So interesting number there. Here's something you're going to hear me beat into the ground a little bit, but by gosh, I'm gonna. 30 of the 37 agencies lacked the Google Plus button actually on their website. A big pet peeve of mine, you know, and you're going to see stats for each one. I won't beat it into the ground too much, but you know, if you're going to take the time, if you're going to invest in a platform, you know, you got to put that button on your site. You got to do it. And so 30 out of 37 to me, that's hardly an excuse. Or I should say there is no excuse for that high a number. You got to help your prospects find you. Get that done no matter what platform you're using. 12 of 37 posted with any regularity at all. So you can see already not a ton of activity as far as agencies go on Google+. Let's talk about in terms of who's using it and apparently doing a good job with it. At the top with 348 followers was 5W Public Relations. 348, I mean, that's a nice healthy number, especially on Google+. The next in line was Godfrey with 116. You know, I'll say this once in terms of it, I've already mentioned it a bit. You know, the reason we're pointing out these agencies while we're actually, you know, name checking them, if you will. Of course, more followers does not equal more breakthroughs to potential clients per se, nor does it equate to quality per se. As with any new business activity, numbers are only part of the equation. You know, the key is who are those followers. So at 5W, to use their example, those 348, you know, you're hoping that the majority of those are their prospects, because if not, well, then they're talking to themselves, or they're talking to their friends, or to other, you know, public PR firms or agencies. Now, I say that. On the other hand, you know, having said that, numbers mean something. It does mean something to your prospects when they get on a page like Google, or excuse me, a platform like Google+. They see a vibrant, content-rich platform with a strong follower base. You know, it's about awareness. It's about SEO. It's about driving prospects to that platform. So again, we point out if you've been struggling with any of these platforms, and Google Plus being the example here, you know, we want you to be able to spend some time, do a little research on your own. So go to 5W's Google Plus page if that's something of interest to you in terms of a platform to help your new business effort. See what they're doing right. Why do they have that 348 number? And see if it's something you can emulate, you know, in terms of their techniques. Now, Google Plus, is it a good option? You know, many still see it as a Facebook wannabe. Unfortunately, from the day it launched, you know, that it got that association. Do I think that's entirely fair? No. Going to the next slide. Only 12 agencies out of the 37 use Google Plus regularly. Look how sad the dog looks. He's sad about that. You know, again, not seeing a ton of activity. So currently, for your new business purposes, Google Plus, it hasn't really caught on. That's probably not a big surprise if you know about it at all. But the key with any of these platforms are your prospects there. For you specifically, the agency, a partner, principal, new business development individual there. Sure, still good for SEO, general awareness, staying on top of trends, and with current clients, they're going to be asking you about platforms like these. So certainly there's going to be some benefit to you in terms of exploring these, and you should. But at this point, time is, of course, we already talked about it, it's of the essence, right? So if you're going to have to invest that time that is so precious to you and your agency to try to get new business, this is not where we recommend that you spend a ton of it unless you just have the manpower to experiment with it. Now, last thing I'll say, interesting about Google Plus, it was discussed at HubSpot, that inbound conference, and just happened to mention that because it was just a few weeks ago. Even some of the folks who were presenting, not just on the floor, there were 2,900 people there, I think, at that conference, and about 500 agencies, I believe. Google Plus was still talked about. In circles, I won't get into Google Plus and the mechanics of it here, but circles is one of the differentiators and a place where you can really hone in on, for example, certain verticals or certain topics. It's still something to keep your eye out for. So let's look at Pinterest. 19 out of 100 agencies in our sample used it. So look at that versus 37 out of 100 for Google Plus. Kind of interesting. Out of the gate, not a ton of agencies, at least in our sample, just 100 in the month of May, but still, not a ton there. And here we go. Hating it. 15 of the 19 lacked the Pinterest button. Basically all of them. Again, a little bit of leeway because, when I launched our Pinterest page about, I think it was 8 weeks ago, there was about a 2-week lag where we did not have the button there. We're experimenting with it a bit, so maybe I'll give you that. But otherwise, again, help your prospects find you. Make it easy for them. M. Booth and Associates had the most number in our sample of 146. Followers. That's impressive. I mean, we spent, like I said, about 8 weeks for us. We just have about 36 followers, and we haven't pushed Pinterest a lot yet. But again, go to M. Booth's page. If you're not that familiar with Pinterest, just wanted to show you just quickly what it looks like. This is their homepage. As I said, I'll be quick here, but essentially think of Pinterest, it's in the name, as a bulletin board. Think of a physical bulletin board. Okay, you have the board and you're pinning things on it, pictures, articles, what have you. Each one of these squares represents the board. That's what they're called, boards. And then you can pin. It's a very visual representation, a very visual platform, and you can pin things like video, images, articles, blog posts. And I wanted to give you some comparison here. This is our page. Ultimately, it's interesting. I like Pinterest over Facebook in some ways. I mean, you don't have the same level of conversation. Now, while you can comment on things in Pinterest, here's the one thing where I think you have to be careful of, and I'll talk about Facebook a little bit in contrast, and it's simply this. I think you have to be careful about how many boards you have and how much you pin on any given board. You can see here, we purposely have just this small amount of 7 boards right now. I'll delve in a little bit deeper here. So I'm going to contradict myself for a minute. You see our people board, if you will, all our employees. Now, this is one where we want to have as many pictures as we can. We don't care that any visitor to this board is going to look at any one given, employee over another. They're all great pictures. They all show our culture, our personality. So in that scenario, hey, pin away. But when it comes to something like this page, this board, I should say, it is sort of we call it the greatest hits, a little bit cheesy, but the greatest hits of our blog. We want individuals or prospects, ideally, to come to this board and see just a certain key amount of blog posts. And here, no more than 6. We're going to keep these up for about another 3 weeks, and then we're going to switch it out about every 2 months. So I think just like Facebook timeline, as great as Facebook is, and you could argue that the merits of that all day, but with timeline, and if you post with any regularity, those images, anything you post is going to get pushed down, obviously, with everything you post, to the point where then the following month, that month disappears. Now you can go, of course, and find it. So it's not truly disappearing. Having said that, what I like about Pinterest is I can keep this board static. You're not going to lose, things getting pushed down if you keep the number of boards and then the number of pins to a minimum where it's important. And in this case, that's why I like Pinterest. You're able to drive people there to a very specific spot as a complement to your site and other platforms, other channels for sure. So really quickly, this is interesting from ZDNet, an August 13th article. SAP has teamed with social media consumer insights firm NetBase to determine just what people are saying and thinking about what has become one of the most rapidly popular startups in a while, that is Pinterest. Researchers based their report on the 5 million conversations about the social media wonderkind across Facebook, Twitter, blogs, and other social media resources. Thus far, Pinterest buzz peaked in February, but that doesn't mean the craze is over, as SAP and NetBase hailed Pinterest as the fastest growing social site ever. And it's interesting to talk about peaking in February. Well, this next slide I thought was pretty neat. It's neat. I don't use that word very often. I don't know where that came from, but this is from the Evidon blog, and I just like this. I mean, you can see to say that Pinterest's growth is explosive is obviously an understatement. You see things like Twitter with 48.9% and LinkedIn with 65.4%. Great growth from that February to July window, but wow, I mean, Pinterest at 673%. Now, having said that, that number alone doesn't justify you running to set up your agency Pinterest page, but it's not going anywhere, at least for now. So worth investigating. And I will be the first to admit, I was wary of Pinterest at first, did not see the value. I jumped on there not being very familiar with it other than just reading some articles. What do I see? I see recipes, I see fashion, which is cool. But I thought, how is that really going to help us, get new prospects? Or how is that going to help agencies? Because you'll see not a lot of agencies on Pinterest yet, or I should say not see, but as we pointed out, only 19 in our sample. I will say in our experience to date, having set up the Pinterest page for us, we have found about 200 agencies there to date. It's a little bit tough. I'll say if there's a flaw, that's probably too extreme a word in this scenario, but just we'll use it. One flaw, it is a little bit tough to find folks in terms of searching on Pinterest because, for example, if you search for advertising or even advertising agency, which I've done, you're not going to get a big chunk of agencies. You're going to get, it's all over the map. So I think in your case, what's going to be helpful, you being agencies, brands are there and it's a little bit easier to find them, but they're not there in great numbers. You may already know that. So, how are ultimately, what are agencies doing here? They're sharing culture, similar to Facebook in that scenario. But it's great. It's an amazing visual way to share work, video, infographics. And again, photos of the agency, employees, the building, philanthropy, all those. And I think really key there is your work. Absolutely. I mean, talk about a great way where it doesn't even have to be, a formal case study, but you can do that all day and then send prospects directly, to that board. So I think, again, something to watch for. Keep an eye on Pinterest. Okay, what about LinkedIn? We looked into groups that principals of the 100 agencies were a part of. So take a step back for a second. Foregone conclusion, LinkedIn is a very effective business tool, a new business tool. I'm going to guess here, or at least I hope it's true, that every one of you out there are on LinkedIn. And that when it's appropriate, you are reaching out to your prospects and trying to link with them. When I say appropriate, I don't want to rehash anything you've heard before or that we certainly have said, but it's something where you got to be careful. If you're linking in with no prior contact at all, essentially that's spam, and no one likes that. None of us. I know we still get those probably. So what we wanted to look at was specifically LinkedIn groups. And if you're not familiar, there's almost a group for everything these days, good and bad, and a little bit of a double-edged sword there. So what we wanted to look at was, as far as RSW goes, should we be more involved in groups? Well, interestingly, no groups with more than in our 100 agency sample, no groups with more than 10 of the principals in any given group. In fact, there was no more than 8. So you look at here, the 4A's group, e-marketing, advertising age, all these, known names, very spread out. So what does that mean? Well, for RSW, it means maybe groups are worth checking in on, looking at questions, but we're going to be spread out, in terms of trying to find one where a lot of agencies are. It's been interesting. Our owner Mark, for our sister company, RSW Agency Search, started up a group, and that's actually it's been doing okay. It's tough because there's a lot of groups out there, but that's been, and I'll include a link to that here in the presentation when you're able to download it early next week. But otherwise, and that I wasn't trying to endorse that group, but just to say that I've been pleasantly surprised with how many marketers and agencies are on there. So I think what you've got to ask yourself, and what's key about groups for you, and what we did see was a lot of those agency principals were in groups specific to the verticals they worked in, as they should be. Whether that's food ingredients, whether that's broader CPG, you can name just about automotive, any kind of group any kind of niche, and they're there. But even then, what we found, and this is something to be careful of, and you've probably seen it, we still see a lot of agencies talking to each other. So even like in the food ingredients group, for example, an agency principal or new business person, will ask a question, and a whole lot of agencies answering them. Where are the marketers? You got to be where your prospects are. So just something to think about there with LinkedIn. So let's look at real quick a recap just of what we've talked about so far. Not only are agencies less active on Pinterest and Google, as you will see with the other platforms we look at here in a moment, but agencies are giving them less attention. There's less posting. There's a higher percentage of pages not linked to. And here's another pet peeve: out of date or no information at all, a lack of information. It's one thing with blogs, and we've said this before, so I'll say it again. It's ultimately, if a blog's out of date, you're looking at it a year out, it's not a good reflection of your agency. The same, we saw this on Pinterest, when ultimately you get on a Pinterest page, and we saw this with those 19, and they're completely blank, not a good way to go. So, make sure you've got at least, some kind of base when you start a platform like Pinterest. You're able to, quickly create 4 or 5 boards and give it a little meat. So the big two, our agency sample. Agencies are using Twitter and Facebook the most. So what's working for them? Start with Facebook. 84 out of 100 using it. Nice healthy number there. Makes the polar bear dance. Everybody's happy. 20 out of 84 like the Facebook button on their site. There we go again. I'll try not to freak out, but Facebook's been around a long time. This is indeed a Facebook fail. Put that button on your site. 31 of 84 had less than 5 posts in the month of May. Not probably a big shock there. Interesting though. Average in May of the 84 agencies using Facebook, about 11.6 posts. Again, I would have thought that had been a little bit higher, but an interesting number. So, highs and lows on Facebook. OneUpWeb posted 67 times. 10 agencies didn't post at all. Again, talking about not reflecting well on the agency. If you're not going to be able to do it, or you see that, wow, we're not able, we're just so busy, take it down, deactivate it. You can always do it again. It just doesn't look good. And as far as, OneUpWeb posting 67 times, again, here's our Facebook page. You could say, well, yeah, anybody can post 150 times if they want. Doesn't mean it's good. Absolutely true. But I will say in OneUpWeb's case, and again, they're not a client, I'm not endorsing necessarily, but I will say, spend a little time, and they are doing a good job. It's one, again, I would recommend you, after this is over, or sometime over the next weeks or months, you take a little time and check out what they're doing. Between interaction, the culture, and we'll show you here in a moment, some of the things that we found across all agencies that was effective. Give them a look. Same with Shift. They had 3,013 likes in May. Pretty impressive. Next in line was Hunter PR, La Comunidad, and OneUpWeb. There they are. There they are again. How do you get to that point? That's far ahead where we are on Facebook. I'll just tell you right now. Something where it's worth checking out how it is that that they're doing this. So what we looked at, what posts resonated most, the kinds of posts. In terms of resonating most, company culture by far. Client appreciation was probably next in line, in terms of Facebook, in terms of on Facebook, agencies calling out, congratulations to this client for X, and typically, as you might not be surprised to hear, it was work they did for them. But, absolutely a great way to say thanks or great job. But the culture, here's one screenshot, from Shift, employee outing, showing some folks and giving faces to names. And then kinds of posts in terms of pictures, in office, employees, outside of office, philanthropy. I'm intrigued by the Pink Gorilla. I don't know what's going on there, but it's somewhere it looks like I'd like to visit. La Comunidad. They give different employees control of the page on certain weeks. I love this. In terms of consistency, in that month of May, they had about 39 posts. You see here the screenshot where they had Paula, apparently, that was doing the page that week. I definitely would encourage that. What a great way to show different facets of the agency every week. And you also farm out the responsibility, so no one person, if time is of the essence, which we know it is, you're able to do that. Highly recommend that. So let's look at, recap on Facebook. What is it across those 100 agencies, and including us as well? What's working? Company culture, most important. Second was keeping it consistent. As in life, as in new business, when you have the one Facebook post and then it's 3 weeks, and then you have 8 and then none. I mean, it's a hard thing to do, right? But you got to try to do that. Staying informal and simple, having conversations. asking questions. And, I don't mean, because I still see this and it drives me nuts, when an agency says, oh, what's your favorite season? Oh my, no, try to ask something, specific to your vertical or that makes sense in terms of your culture, your personality. Share images, that as we said before, that's huge. Client work, the team, outings around the office. Share news, blog posts, webinars, articles, whether it's your own or others. Employee weeks, as I mentioned before, like with La Comunidad, love that idea. Promoting with other channels, no space between other and channels, that's nice. But use those other platforms and use it sparingly. But send folks to Facebook via your Twitter feed or via Pinterest. Make sure you're cross pollinating there, if you will. And lastly, reflect that personality of the agency. Absolutely, right there up front with the importance of company culture. Let's look at Twitter. So 86 out of 100 agencies in our sample used it. Probably about in keeping maybe with what you might think, a pretty high number. 17 lacked the Twitter button on their site. I'm not going to say no this many times, but I'd like to. Again, don't do it. Get that up on your homepage. 37 of 86 had less than 30 tweets in May. Not necessarily a surprising number in my estimation. Average per month of May, 37.8 tweets of our 100 agency sample. Again, needs to be a little bit higher in terms of what you'll see here shortly. Again, OneUp interesting. Tweeted 192 times. That's a lot. Interesting, jump on their feed and see, wow. To me, that seems almost too much, but it's interesting because it all depends on context and content. So we'd love to see, what that looked like. 11 agencies didn't tweet at all. We see Facebook, there were 10, right? This is making the Twitter bird sick. He's throwing up. You see that? You don't want to do that. Sad. PJA, 9,693 followers in May. That's impressive. This is one I'm more familiar with than others. Have talked to some of the folks there before. Again, not a client, but they do a nice job all around with all their channels, including articles and things of that nature. So if you're not familiar with what they're doing on different platforms, I would say check them out. But that's a healthy number. Rounding out the top four, 5WPR. You seeing a pattern here with a couple of these, right? In line next was Profero and then Fathom. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 in order of our 100 agency sample. Again, as I said, you're going to be able to download these slides, but worth checking out for sure. So at this point, when we were looking at this informal survey, if you will, or I should say more research project, Twitter really became the focus. We decided to focus solely on Twitter. At that point, we can say it's been our primary driver in terms of new business success via social media. Can say the same for a lot of agencies out there that we're aware of. So that's where we're going to focus here. From a new business standpoint, it's interesting, and I'll just say the last thing here in terms of why Twitter. We started to see Facebook be more like this poster. We don't care what you think about us. We don't think about you at all. A little harsh, yes. Entirely fair, no. But it's one of those things, and I'm sure we can all attest, especially the bigger the company, when you get on a Facebook page of a brand, they're typically talking at you or at the consumer. Certainly many more companies have gotten better at this in the last several years, absolutely, to be fair. But ultimately, what we want to see are direct interactions, and that's where we think Twitter's going to be better. How are agencies using Twitter? Sharing relevant articles, information and links. Promoting blog posts and sharing others. Job listings, retweeting others. Probably not a lot of surprises here, but something good to think about. Dialogue with others. Retweeting and mentioning employees. Sharing company news. As far as RSW, we just wanted to show you what are we doing, just as a point of comparison. Tweeted about 108 times in May. That's about 3.6 per day. We retweeted others. We promoted A and B posts. There's a little post for you. We shared interesting links and articles. We engaged in dialogue. And last, live tweeted during webinars like this. So just to show you as a point of comparison in terms of doing about some of the same things in terms of what has been working for agencies across the board. This was interesting, and you'll get a link to this when I post these too. A 2012 report by Buddy Media that made suggestions on how to effectively tweet. They created this tweet cheat sheet, and that's hard to say. And what we took this because we liked generally, besides just the fact that it was a nice one pager, we liked the fact that it's all in one place. We thought, let's compare this sheet against what other agencies are doing and ourselves, and see, like the cats, see indeed were these sound recommendations based off what we saw other agencies doing it. So what did this, and this is what that cheat sheet showed, by the way, so you can actually tell. I know it was hard to read there. Tweet during busy hours, they recommended 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Tweet 4 times per day or less. Use less than 100 characters per tweet, and explain why that's important if you don't know already. Add links, they recommended. Include hashtags, but use less than 2 at any given tweet. Include images. And then ask followers to retweet. Ask in your Twitter or in a given tweet to retweet this, please, kind of a thing. So that's what they all recommended. So now let's look at, in terms of our sample of 100 agencies, did they follow those on average? Did they tweet during busy hours? On average, yes. Did they tweet 4 or less, in terms of 4 tweets a day or less? Typically, yes. Did they use less than 100 characters? Actually, yes, which I was surprised to see on average that they did, because you see a lot still not doing that. Adding links, yes, that was typical. Including hashtags, there's a check and there's an X. About half. Some did, some didn't, but we saw on average it was about 50-50. Asking for retweets, we very rarely saw that, and quite frankly, I was glad to see that, and I'll quickly explain why. And then including pictures, interestingly, not a lot did. Let's say less than 20% ultimately. So, a recap on Twitter. What are we saying, yes, you should do based off the agencies we've seen in our own success? Tweet during on hours, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., absolutely. I will say what's interesting, and you may have seen this before in a separate report, was that I've seen a couple of recommendations. You should tweet also in off hours, and so I don't want to try to say anything directly disproportionate to this tweet during on hours, but give it a shot, because I will say in the past several months I've tweeted and I've set this up via Social Oomph, and that's not, again, that's just one out there that you could use, but it happens to be a free service where you can schedule your tweets, and on one tweet on Saturday, one tweet on Sunday, on average you get about 10 followers out of that. A drop in the bucket, perhaps, yes. I will say we did not have any direct conversations over the weekend. I know, for one, I am not jumping out of bed and jumping onto Twitter, on the weekends, but something to experiment with if you have, quickly set that up and see if it gets you somewhere. Make sure to tweet at least once a day, less than 4 times a day, absolutely. I know we can all talk about the fact that certain individuals that tweet on the hour, every hour, gets really annoying. Keep tweets simple. Okay, remember the retweet. That's the less than 100 characters. I still see this a lot, and quite frankly, occasionally we are guilty of this, so we really try to remember not to do it. But if it's the full 140 characters in Twitter, yes, it can be retweeted in the sense that it retweets just the tweet, but what you want, right, are the comments. You want someone just to briefly be able to say, oh, great, or hey, disagree, whatever it is. You got to keep it less than the full amount so people can retweet it and be able to comment. There's no need to ask for retweets. I quite frankly don't like that at all. I think it can have a place if it's something of importance, where you're trying to get something out. Maybe it's a survey, or maybe it's something more philanthropic. In that scenario, then yes. But otherwise, if it's just simply, hey, I hope someone reads another blog post, I personally don't like it, and we don't see a ton of it. But there's, just like anything, there's proper place for it. Using hashtags in every tweet, we're experimenting more with that. Certainly would recommend not using more than 2. I think you might not be surprised to hear it. At a conference, a webinar like this, live chats on Twitter, that's where they make sense for sure. So, conclusions in terms of where we are right now. Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, definitely the kings. Pinterest is a more visual Facebook. It still kind of gets that tag. Again, not entirely fair, but obviously the growth is there. Something to keep your eye on. In Google+, the jury really is still out. Again, I wouldn't count it out, but wouldn't invest too much time there in terms of your precious time and devoting that to new business. Let's look briefly how RSW US uses Twitter, how we use Twitter. And then we're going to show you how a few tests we did with an NBD that actually broke through and got meetings. I think that's what's really going to be helpful for you today. I want to show you screenshots of what led to meetings. But this is our page. If you haven't seen it, try hard every day indeed. How do we use Twitter? Just go through this quickly. Similar to what agencies are doing. We are sharing relevant articles, information, and links. We're promoting A&B blog posts. Our blog is called the A&B, stands for Agency New Business if you're not aware, and sharing others. Job listings, We're retweeting others, of course, and that includes, make sure when you're doing that, retweet your clients. Do that. You want to do it sparingly. Then it gets obnoxious, but certainly something to think about. Directly dialoguing with others, certainly. Sharing company news. So, again, how do we use Twitter? In terms of what we do and don't in that Buddy cheat sheet, Buddy Media cheat sheet, tweeting during busy hours, yes. Tweeting 4 or less a day, typically yes. We are using less than 100 characters, as I said. Occasionally we break that. Try not to, though. Add links. About 95% of our tweets do have links. That's key. And then hashtags, yes and no. Again, where it's appropriate, absolutely. So, how are RSW US new business directors making it work? Hard work, yes. But it's interesting. What we'll start with, I'll follow up with that interesting thought, but let's real quickly show you a guideline here in terms of the handle and what we did, just to fill you in. We had a particular new business director that we wanted to test with a couple of clients, so it wasn't an official in that way. All our new business directors use social media to a certain extent in just about every platform. A great deal of that is monitoring. It's a great source of information for prospects and your prospects, the marketers out there. What we want to do is specifically see how we're breaking through just using Twitter, and I shouldn't say just using Twitter, but specifically using Twitter. So what we had was this new business director, every handle in Twitter starts with the @ and then used her first name and then and then the agency name. So in other words, in this scenario, we're using my name, Lee. If the agency's name is Westerberg, I happen to be a fan of the band The Replacements. The lead singer's name was Paul Westerberg, so just that's where that comes from. But if the agency's name is Westerberg, the handle is going to be Lee of Westerberg. So in other words, it's Lee of whatever agency. So we want to make sure that, because we're using every channel we can, we didn't want it to be just a random name or just the person's name. We wanted the agency to be associated with that. This is what I was getting to by being interesting. Agencies tend to make Twitter and a lot of social platforms way too hard. Here's 4 simple examples, ways to help you break through. First is the follow. We've given them clever little names. Second is the retweet. Third is the reply or the compliment. And fourth is the favorite. First is the follow. Jane was the new business director, by the way. So what we did here, starting at the top, and these are a little bit out of order, so I'll walk you through it. This was a simple occurrence where a prospect followed Jane in this case. So Jane says there was the follow by Andrew. I'll tell you his first name. Sorry about the bars, but keeping this on the down low. She says, "Hello, Andrew. Good to see you. Thanks for following us. How's the new business coming?" He immediately follows up with, "It's coming along, but I would love to get you involved with promotion and marketing for the association." So actually a little bit out of order here. So the next tweet is at the bottom where Jane says, "I'll talk with the team about it this morning. Are you thinking of meeting with the group sometime in July maybe?" And that's key because what you could have done, and I've seen agencies do it, is say, "Oh, great, we'll follow up." No, she threw it out there, thinking of a meeting sometime in July. There it is. So thinking about, closing in that scenario. So he says here in the third tweet there, "Sounds great. Have a couple of dates for you in advance. What's a good time to talk next week?" Now, listen, is this basic? Yeah, it sure is. But, and we'll talk about this just real briefly when I mentioned the HubSpot keynote takeaways for you. The specific keynote was from Gary Vaynerchuk, if you're familiar with him. And this is not an endorsement again of Gary necessarily, but he had a great keynote. He mentioned how easy social media is in the sense that there are all these platforms. It's so easy to become a part of social media, but because of that, you can get on there and spew whatever you want, but you have to set yourself apart, right? So from a customer service standpoint was one of his big tenets of that talk. It's not new, but it's about effort. It's about making an effort. And in this case, it was very simple, very basic, but Jane made the effort to reach out. And I think what's interesting is when I say agencies make it too hard sometimes, how easy was this to do? But look what happened. Now, is this going to happen every time? Of course not, but it's another channel. It's another way to break through. And I wanted to show you a simple way, something you could emulate just to see. Let's see where this can go for our agency. So the second was the retweet. Very simple here. It was something where Jane, with one of her other clients, had just, in that bottom tweet, had just said congratulations on the high marks to it was a particular development council here in the U.S. for a particular city. They had gotten high marks. That's the one tweet that you can't see, but they'd gotten really good marks from a particular some kind of a survey that they had. Now that council then retweeted to 544 followers. Okay, great. I mean, you just boosted your awareness by 544 individuals. Now, were those all other prospects? Maybe not. But ultimately, what I'll tell you is, and this is another thing that's going to be very important, and we'll get to a slide here in just a few seconds, you can't operate in a vacuum when it comes to Twitter or any other social platform channel. Because what happened here is Jane did in fact get a meeting here. She got in front, got in the door with a face-to-face meeting for her client. But what was key here was she then followed up in other channels. Phone, email. She obviously didn't just leave it on Twitter, but see, that's what's key, is you have to use all these in conjunction with one another. So again, a simple follow, and that's what came from it. Or excuse me, a simple retweet, excuse me. The third is the reply or compliment. I know a couple of these really kind of could all be compliments, I suppose, but I think here this one was interesting. Was Fidelity. Jane had with another client. She had just tweeted that Fidelity, apparently they had an app they created, and Money Magazine had done a piece on it here several months back. She just said, great recognition. Congrats on an app. Very well done. Simple to the point. They come back and say, thanks. Which features do you use the most? I love this because what a door opener here. You know, now certainly Jane could come back with an answer under 140 characters and say, oh, I love X feature the most. But instead, what I love is that you go back and you say, hey, two we need to count, or love several of them, would love to follow up and tell you a bit more about what we loved, and talk about maybe a bit what we do. And that's a paraphrase. You want to get as specific as you can. But that's what I love here. What a great door opener there. And again, it's something so simple. It was a simple compliment that she threw out there. She'd done a little bit of research. Again, it's about effort. And here, you know what, didn't take a ton of it. But it's something where you're going a little bit further than other agencies to try to reach out. Last is the favorite. This is one actually for me, but I just wanted to show you another very easy thing to do. And actually, I favorited myself technically because I do the RSW feed too, so it's getting very meta. But what I did was my own personal Twitter feed, Lee McKnight Jr. I clicked the star on that particular tweet within Twitter. So in other words, I favorited it for myself. What's great here, though, and where I'd like this for you and for your prospects, they get that email. If a tweet has been favorited, they being your prospect, will receive that. Here's what I like. It's not so much about breaking through at that point, even though that could help you. How I like this is a lot of times after maybe you've had a conversation or after you've traded a few emails. It's about when that particular prospect maybe has gone a little bit dark. It's been a few weeks, right? This is a great way to get back in front of them, just one way, without being overly salesy or salesy at all. Now, you don't want to do this every single day or do like 10 favorites in a day, but you do that, and what I think is going to happen here, I don't have scientific data to back this up, but you tell me. If you are emailing them, they may have it sit and say, okay, I'll put this in my inbox. Sure, maybe we want to talk to them, but I'm busy. But if they get it from Twitter and it's been favorited, I think they're going to open that, when they're going to see. Maybe not a guarantee every time, certainly, but again, just another way, another basic example that can be very effective. So look, I hope those help in terms of just other ways to think about Twitter that you may or may not be using. As I said, you are going to be able to download and be able to see all that again. But three things to remember here, big picture, okay? It's just one tool. Your prospects may not be there in numbers. Okay, we readily admit that. What that means is, and I think it's gotten better and better every single year or month as Twitter just continues to grow and grow, but there are certain sectors that are behind rather than others. I think B2B is one I can think about where, in our experience, some of them just aren't on Twitter, versus like a healthcare, for example, where we know in certain sectors they really are, or CPG. So here's what I recommend. Find your prospects. Take a list of 50 of your 50 of your prospects, or 100, whatever you have time for. Take an hour. Get on each one of their websites. See, are they on Twitter? Follow them. I would say if there's at least 30. Okay, I'm picking a number here. If there's at least 30, though, Twitter's going to be worth it for you. But you know what? You only find a handful out of those 50 or 100. It's 5 or 6 or 10. Maybe you shouldn't be investing too much time on Twitter. But that's a nice, again, it's not scientific, but it's showing you, are your prospects there? And this is something else that in Gary Vee's talk that he talked about. It's all about context. And we've talked about this before, too. Are your prospects there? Are you doing this in the right place? So, already talked about number 2. You cannot operate in a vacuum. A breakthrough in one channel has to be followed up in another. Sounds simple? Duh. Well, you know what? We still know a lot of agencies that don't do it. That they get through in one, and for whatever reason they get busy or they're not being consistent, and they let it slide. Don't do that. Dive in, right? The person tweeting may not be your prospect. I can almost guarantee at least a few of you have been thinking, yeah, that's great, But we all know that when, especially the bigger the brand, whoever that is tweeting is not the CMO. It's not the VP of marketing, for example. If they are tweeting, typically, they have their own feed. Now, all that being true, I think ultimately it can still help you. I know it's helped Jane in her test. I know it's helped me personally when I'm reaching out to prospects. That's fine. Okay, probably not, or it may not be your prospect. What do? You follow up with an email or a phone call to your prospect and say, and I'm paraphrasing here again, you want to make it as specific as you can, but had a great conversation on Twitter about X. Not sure that you run the Twitter feed. I'm thinking you probably don't, but this is what came in the conversation, and here's why I'm following up with you. I think we may be of help to you. Would love to have a conversation, and it does work. I've had it work for me. So it's something where, yes, understood, may not be your prospect. It doesn't mean it still can't help you to break through. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. Just a few thoughts from Inbound 2012. And again, appreciate everyone attending so far. Have a lot of folks still here, so really do appreciate that. The conference, again, this is not an endorsement, but at the same time, it was a very good conference. Again, I'm specifically speaking to Gary V's keynote speech. I will say, because I think you'll probably be able to get this either on the HubSpot site, I believe. I'm not sure yet. He drops the F-bomb right and left. So if you are going to watch it, it's well worth watching, but just be careful about turning the speakers up. It was actually pretty humorous. But just if you don't know who he is, he's grown basically a wine business from 4 million to 60 million. Social media is a huge part of what he does. He's written a couple of books as well. But you know what? Ultimately, it's something I do want to check a few of those out. But here's why I'm mentioning him at all. He had 3 things that he mentioned: context, the Flintstones, what is that all about? You'll see, and execution. Interestingly, I was taking notes during this, but I will say I got to give a thank you to Michael Gass. He had a post recently where he had compiled I don't know if it was but it was like 50 tweets from this particular presentation, and it helped me with this webinar. So thanks, Michael. The first one: if content is king, then context is God. Okay, and essentially at the bottom, that's what it means. If you're not where your customer's attention is, you're going to lose big, and it's absolutely true. I've already talked about it. Interestingly, maybe this is why I liked the keynote speech so much, because it's what we here at RSW have been espousing ever since we've been around. You got to be where your prospects are, but so specifically in social media, as I mentioned. If you're on Twitter and you don't really know who's following you or who you're following, and it's random and it's friends and it's I don't know, then you're either talking to yourself or you're talking to other agencies. Doesn't help you in terms of new business. Okay, so context is everything. As our world goes more Jetsons, the marketers who act more Flintstones will succeed. People want effort. We already talked about this again too, but want to reinforce it. It is about going that extra mile. Yes, it's cheesy. Yes, it's a cliche in terms of saying that, but Gary had a good point in that with social media specifically, it is very easy to get on it and very easy to spew out things without a whole lot of effort. But it's about getting into where your prospects are and finding that great content and getting it into the right place. And with a little bit of effort, they're going to recognize that. You're going to beat the other agency because they're not making that effort. Last, social is just a tool, but you must execute. This is what Gary said. Execution is hard, capital H-A-R-D. People avoid BS tactics, avoid automation. Authenticity is key. The only thing I don't like about that is authenticity gets thrown around way too much, but 100% true. Tactics are great, but you need to put in effort and commit to execution if you want to build a strong brand. Execution is everything. You've heard it before. Well, hear it again, because here's the thing. You can use HubSpot, a great platform like that, to get you all this great, great inbound leads. You can create all the content to your heart's content, and it can be fantastic. Okay, but if you don't get to the first meeting, then if you don't close that first meeting, if you don't execute on all this effort, all of it's for nothing, and that's where agencies 100% fall short. They don't mean to, they don't want to, but clients do come first. So you got to invest the time, the people, whatever it takes to ultimately get that execution off the ground. It's going to work for you. So what does that mean overall? No more excuses. Get out there today, and I hope this has been of help to you. As I said, we're going to post a webinar probably either tomorrow or Monday, and the next day, like Tuesday, going to post these slides with an extra 2 pages of links to just about everything we discuss, so you can take a look. Any questions? There were a few, and I'll answer you following up here, because I know I don't want to keep you for the full hour. Lee@rswus.com is my email. Please feel free to shoot me any questions about today or our services. In terms of the last webinar in our series, That's Thursday, October 11th at 12 p.m. Mark's going to be doing that one. Our last one in the series, as I said, Building a Better Agency New Business Program. We hope you can come to that. Great turnout today. Really appreciate it. Got a couple of compliments here at the end, and really, no, thank you all for coming. I really hope it helps. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.